Hello, friends.
The sun had barely risen when I boarded the return flight from Chicago. My heart was full after a trip that felt like a chapter pulled from an old, cherished book. The business deal was sealed, a partnership promising to catapult our company to a new echelon of success. It wasn't just the deal, though. Reuniting with Emily, my younger sister, after nearly a decade, had been the real highlight. We sat for hours reminiscing about our childhood, tracing memories as if they were sacred landmarks on a map of time. I was eager to return home, my carry-on heavy with a gift I had carefully selected for Amanda, my wife of 5 years. The thought of surprising her for our anniversary filled me with a giddy sort of anticipation. I pictured her face as she opened the small, velvet box containing a bracelet studded with tiny, diamond-like stars. By the time the wheels of the plane kissed the runway, the day was well underway. I couldn't help but smile at the serendipity of arriving home just before Amanda left work. Traffic was light, a rarity, and I arrived 20 minutes earlier than expected. As I stepped through the door, the silence in the house seemed unusually dense, but I brushed it off, assuming Amanda had left for an early meeting. I went to the kitchen, placing the gift box prominently on the dining table, positioning it so it would catch her eye the moment she returned. I walked into the living room, pulling out my phone to check for any missed messages. And that's when I noticed it. A scarf, a man's scarf, hung over the edge of our couch. My chest tightened. It wasn't mine. Amanda rarely invited friends over without mentioning it, especially men. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it belonged to a colleague who dropped her off the previous evening. Still, a seed of unease began to sprout, its roots threading through my thoughts as I picked up the scarf. I held it for a moment, turning it over in my hands, before setting it on the back of the couch. In that moment, I heard a sound upstairs, a shuffle, like someone moving quickly but trying not to be heard. I froze, my mind racing. It couldn't be Amanda, she would have called out by now. I moved towards the staircase, each step heavier than the last. Reaching the top, I paused. The bedroom door was ajar, just enough for me to see a sliver of the room beyond. And then I heard a voice. Low, masculine. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat screaming for me to turn back, but my feet moved forward as if possessed. I pushed the door open. Inside, I found Amanda sitting on the edge of the bed, her face a mosaic of shock and shame. Standing across from her, a man I didn't recognize, shirt half-buttoned, froze in place. The air between us was thick with the unspeakable, the silence louder than any shout I could have mustered. What's going on here? My voice trembled, betraying the storm brewing inside me. Amanda opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes darting to the man. Michael, it's not what it looks like, she finally managed, her voice cracking. The man, a stranger in every sense, started to stammer something, but I raised a hand, silencing him. I think it's time you left, I said, my tone cold and flat. He grabbed his jacket and bolted, the sound of his footsteps fading as the front door slammed. Amanda stood, her tears flowing freely now. Michael, please let me explain. I held up the scarf. She nodded, her chin trembling. Why? I asked. The single word felt like it carried the weight of 1,000 accusations. Amanda wiped at her cheeks, taking a deep breath. It was a mistake, a horrible, stupid mistake. I didn't know how to tell you. I laughed, the sound hollow and bitter. You didn't think to not do it in the first place? Her silence was answer enough. The hours that followed blurred together. Amanda tried to explain, recounting months of loneliness she claimed stemmed from my long work hours and increasing absences. Her words stung more than I wanted to admit because a part of me understood her reasoning. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it shed light on the fissures in our marriage I'd been blind to, or worse, ignored. As night fell, I sat in the darkened living room, the velvet box still on the dining table. Amanda had retreated upstairs after an argument that left us both emotionally battered. My mind replayed every moment of the day, each revelation, each excuse. I opened the box and held the bracelet in my hand, its tiny stars glinting under the dim light. It had felt like a symbol of our bond just a day ago. Now, it felt like an artifact from a life that no longer existed. When Amanda came down later, her eyes swollen and red, we didn't speak. She sat across from me, and for a moment, we simply stared at each other, two strangers bound by years of shared history, trying to find a way forward in the wreckage of trust. It was 2 days after the bombshell, and Amanda's attempts to reconnect felt desperate. She left me messages, some tearful, some apologetic, others defensive. I hadn't returned most of them, but one stood out, puzzling me enough to take the bait. Michael, her voice was soft, careful. I know things are strained, but some friends are organizing a celebration for you. It's to honor your big Chicago deal. I know it's the last thing you want to do, but it's important. They've gone out of their way. I didn't respond immediately. Something about the offer felt off. Amanda's tone wasn't the same Amanda I'd known for 5 years. It lacked her usual confidence, her ability to press me firmly but with love. This wasn't pleading, it felt scripted. And the location? A new lounge in a part of the city I actively avoided. It was the kind of neighborhood where boarded-up windows and graffiti-covered walls outnumbered streetlights. Still, against my better judgment, I agreed. Part of me wanted to see if this was Amanda's clumsy way of mending bridges. Maybe it was a chance to face her, to get some clarity. Or maybe it was simple morbid curiosity. The day arrived, and I found myself driving towards the address Amanda had texted. As the neighborhoods grew seedier, doubt crept in. The streetlights were dim or flickering, casting uneven shadows across cracked pavement. I parked outside a nondescript building with a chipped sign that read Club Mirage. It didn't look like a place to celebrate a business deal. Inside, the lighting was dim, red, and smoky. The music thudded, heavy bass reverberating through my chest. I scanned the room, expecting Amanda to greet me, or at least a familiar face. Instead, there were strangers. Dozens of them, scattered in small groups. Some looked at me, their eyes lingering uncomfortably long before turning away. A bartender eyed me, his hands busy polishing a glass that already looked spotless. Michael, a voice purred from behind me. I turned to find Amanda, her smile a mix of relief and apprehension. She looked out of place, wearing a polished cocktail dress in a crowd of tattered leather jackets and unkempt hair. "Where are these friends of yours?" I asked, keeping my tone even. She hesitated, glancing around before gesturing to a table near the back. "Over there. They're waiting for us." I followed her, weaving through the crowd. As we approached, I noticed the table wasn't filled with well-wishers. There were 3 men seated, none of whom I recognized, each with the kind of sharp, wolfish smiles that sent warning bells clanging in my head. Their drinks sat untouched, their focus entirely on me. "This is Michael," Amanda introduced, her voice almost timid. "He's the one I told you about." "Told them about?" My stomach tightened. The man in the center, a tall, wiry figure with slicked back hair and a scar running from his cheek to his chin, leaned forward. "Michael, pleasure. We've been dying to meet you. Amanda's spoken highly of you." His words were polite, but his tone was anything but. It was like he'd laced every syllable with some invisible threat. My eyes flicked to Amanda, who was avoiding my gaze. "What's this about?" I asked, my voice steady despite the unease coursing through me. Scarface grinned. "Straight to the point. I like that." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table toward me. "Let's just say, this is an opportunity. For us. A win-win, if you will." I stared at the folder but didn't touch it. "Opportunity for what?" "Take a look," he urged. Amanda's hand brushed my arm. "Michael, just look." Her touch, once comforting, now felt foreign. Reluctantly, I opened the folder. Inside were photographs, grainy but unmistakable. Amanda and the man from our bedroom. Other images followed, her with these men, the one with the scar and his cronies. There were also documents, financial records, wire transfers, and invoices linked to Amanda's name. And then, the final page, a notarized confession of her involvement in laundering money for these men. I closed the folder slowly, my hand trembling. "What the hell is this?" "Insurance," Scarface said smoothly. "Your wife's been a busy woman. And now, so are you." "What are you talking about?" My voice was louder now, drawing a few curious glances from nearby tables. "Here's the deal," he said unfazed. "You're a big shot now, Michael. That deal in Chicago? It puts you in a position to help us out. We need access to certain software channels. You help us, we make sure this," he tapped the folder, "doesn't become public knowledge. Everybody wins." I felt Amanda's hand tighten on my arm. "Michael, please," she whispered. I yanked my arm away, glaring at her. "You knew about this. You brought me here. What did you think I was going to do, roll over and agree?" "I didn't have a choice," she hissed. "They have everything." I stood, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm done here," I said, turning to leave. Scarface's voice stopped me cold. "Walk out that door and this all goes public. Your wife, your deal, everything. You'll lose it all." I turned back, my jaw clenched. "You think you can blackmail me into?" "This isn't blackmail, Michael," he interrupted, his grin widening. "It's a partnership. Think about it." I stormed out, the folder still in my hand. Amanda followed, pleading as we reached the car. "Michael, I didn't know what else to do," she cried. "They threatened me. They threatened us." "You should have come to me," I snapped. "Instead, you dragged me into this mess." As I drove away, her voice faded, replaced by the sound of my own thoughts racing. The betrayal was staggering, but the implications were worse. They hadn't just compromised Amanda, they'd pulled me into their orbit, tainting everything I'd worked for. And now I had a choice to make: play along or fight back. Neither option felt like a win. The knock at the door came just past 9. I hadn't been expecting anyone, but after the bizarre encounter at Club Mirage, my life had been anything but predictable. For a brief moment, I thought it might be Amanda trying, yet again, to talk things over. But as I looked through the peephole, what I saw froze me in place. It was Amanda, but she wasn't alone. 2 men stood behind her, hulking figures dressed in dark clothing. I recognized one of them as the scar-faced man from the club. His grin, predatory and sharp, made my pulse race. My first instinct was to lock the deadbolt and call the cops, but before I could react, Amanda called through the door. "Michael, we need to talk. Please, open the door." Her voice was laced with urgency. Against all logic, I hesitated. Something about her tone, the way it quivered, gave me pause. "Amanda, what are you doing here? And who are they?" I asked, my voice steady, though my hand trembled against the doorknob. "Michael, please, let's not do this through the door. It's important. Just trust me." Trust? After what had happened? Still, I couldn't ignore the pleading in her voice. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door and stepped back. They pushed their way in immediately. Scarface and his accomplice flanked Amanda, their sheer size making the room feel smaller. I backed away, but Scarface grabbed me by the arm, his grip like a vice. "Michael," he said, his tone mocking. "We meet again. Lovely home you've got. Get out," I growled, jerking my arm free. "Whatever this is, I want no part of it." "Oh, but this isn't about what you want," Scarface said. He gestured to his associate, who reached into his jacket and pulled out a set of zip ties. My stomach dropped. "Amanda, what the hell is going on?" I demanded, turning to her. She looked away, her arms wrapped around herself. "Michael, just don't fight them." "What?" Before I could process her words, they were on me. The zip ties bit into my wrists, binding my arms behind my back. They forced me into a chair, the rough edges of the ties digging into my skin. Amanda stood frozen, watching as they restrained me. "Is this how you fix things, Amanda?" I spat. "You call your goons to tie me up? What the hell are you thinking?" Scarface chuckled. "Oh, this isn't just Amanda's idea, pal. We're here to help her with a little justice." "Justice?" I barked. "For what?" Amanda finally spoke, her voice trembling. "For your betrayal, Michael. For your affair." I blinked, stunned. "What the hell are you talking about?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph, tossing it onto the table in front of me. I craned my neck to see it, confusion morphing into shock as I recognized the image. It was a picture of me at a restaurant, laughing with Emily, my sister. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, the absurdity of the accusation hitting me like a slap. That's Emily. My sister. Amanda's face twisted, her features dark with anger. Don't lie to me, Michael. I know what I saw. You're always working late, always out of town. And now this? How stupid do you think I am? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You're losing it, Amanda. That's my sister. We had dinner while I was in Chicago. Ask her. Hell, call my mother. She'll confirm it. Scarface stepped forward, his grin widening. You know, Amanda, he's got an answer for everything, doesn't he? Real smooth talker. Shut up, I snapped at him. This is between me and her. He backhanded me before I could say another word, the force of it whipping my head to the side. Pain flared in my jaw, and I tasted blood. You don't get to talk, pal. You're here to listen. Amanda flinched at the sight of the violence, but she didn't intervene. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice rising. You think I'm stupid, Michael? You think I don't know when I'm being cheated on? I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me. You're out of your mind, I shot back, my voice muffled by the swelling in my cheek. I didn't cheat. Not with her, not with anyone. Amanda leaned down, her face inches from mine. I saw the way you looked at her. The way you laughed with her. You think I wouldn't notice? You're seeing what you want to see, I said, my voice quieter now, trying to break through her hysteria. It's not real. None of this is. For a moment, her mask of rage cracked, revealing something more fragile, doubt. But Scarface stepped in, his voice dripping with malice. Enough talking. Amanda, if he's guilty, make him pay. Her eyes flicked to me, then back to Scarface. I could see the turmoil in her expression, the hesitation. I just want him to understand how much he's hurt me. And he will, Scarface said, handing her a riding crop from his coat. Make him feel it. My blood ran cold as Amanda took the crop, her hands trembling. Amanda, I said, my voice soft. Don't do this. Don't let them manipulate you. She hesitated, staring down at the crop like it was a snake ready to strike. The room was silent except for the thudding of my heartbeat. Finally, she dropped it. It clattered to the floor, breaking the tension like a gunshot. I can't, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I can't do this. Scarface scowled, his easy demeanor slipping. You're wasting my time, he snarled. If you don't want to punish him, maybe we will. He moved toward me, but Amanda stepped between us, her arms outstretched. No. Leave him alone. I've had enough. The room froze. For a moment, Scarface looked like he might shove her aside, but then he sighed, motioning to his partner. Fine. Let's go. They cut the ties on my wrists, leaving me slumped in the chair as they marched out. Amanda lingered, her face a picture of regret and fear. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The betrayal was too fresh, the wound too deep. As she left, the door clicking shut behind her, I sat there, my mind racing. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was war. My breathing was ragged as the door clicked shut, the echoes of the encounter reverberating through the stillness of my living room. The adrenaline hadn't stopped coursing through me, making every heartbeat pound against my ribs like a drum. My wrists stung where the zip ties had bitten into them, and my face throbbed from the slap. But none of that compared to the pain in my chest, a twisting knot of betrayal and fury that left me hollow and trembling. Amanda. Her name wasn't just a thought, it was a dagger. How could she? How could the woman I'd loved for 5 years, the one I'd fought to build a life with, stoop so low, so cruel? She believed I'd betrayed her, a laughable accusation in itself, but this wasn't punishment for an imagined affair. This was something darker, more sinister. I stood shakily, wiping blood from the corner of my mouth. The world around me felt muted, as though my senses were dulled. But beneath it all, there was something stirring, a fire I hadn't felt in years. It surged through me, fueled by the anger, the betrayal, and the need to take back control of the chaos my life had spiraled into. Scarface and his goons were still out there. Amanda was still in their orbit. And I wasn't going to let this continue. Not anymore. The breaking point came later that evening when Amanda returned, alone. She stood in the doorway like a ghost, her face pale and drawn. I could see the traces of guilt in her eyes, but it wasn't enough to soften my resolve. "Michael," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please. Let me explain." "You had your chance to explain," I said coldly, my tone cutting through the silence like a knife. "When you brought them into my home. When you tied me up. When you humiliated me." She flinched, her hands wringing nervously. "I didn't know they'd go that far. I thought—" "You thought what?" I snapped, stepping closer. "That this would somehow fix things? That you could terrify me into confessing to something I didn't do?" Her lip quivered, but I didn't stop. "You don't get it, do you? You crossed a line, Amanda. You let them into our lives, into my life, and now you expect me to forgive you?" "They had leverage on me," she cried, the words spilling out in a desperate rush. "You don't understand, Michael. They threatened me. And you dragged me into it," I interrupted, my voice rising. "Instead of coming to me, instead of trusting me, you let them turn you into their pawn." Her silence spoke volumes. She knew I was right. But then she said something that stopped me cold. "They're coming back." I didn't have time to process her words before the front door burst open, slamming against the wall with a deafening crack. Scarface and his goons were back, their expressions dark and menacing. "Sorry to interrupt the domestic drama," Scarface sneered, stepping into the room. "But we've got unfinished business." I stepped in front of Amanda instinctively, my fists clenching. "Get out of my house." Scarface chuckled, the sound low and menacing. "You're not in a position to give orders, pal. You've got two choices, cooperate, or things get messy." Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the way he smirked, like he owned the room. Maybe it was the realization that Amanda had been right, they wouldn't stop. Or maybe it was the pure, unfiltered rage that had been simmering since this nightmare began. I don't remember the exact moment it happened, but I felt it, a surge of adrenaline, sharp and electric, coursing through my veins. My vision sharpened, my focus narrowing on the men in front of me. My heart raced, but not with fear. This was something else. Something primal. The first man came at me, swinging. I ducked, his fist whistling past my ear, and drove my shoulder into his midsection. He stumbled back, and I followed with a punch to his jaw, the impact jarring but satisfying. Scarface barked orders, but I was already moving, pivoting to face the second man. He lunged, trying to grab me, but I sidestepped, grabbing a nearby lamp and swinging it with all my strength. The ceramic shattered against his head, sending him crashing to the floor. Scarface stepped forward, pulling a knife from his jacket. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, circling me. "But this ends now." I didn't answer. My mind was a blur of instincts and raw energy. He lunged, the blade flashing in the dim light, but I was faster. I grabbed his wrist, twisting it until he dropped the knife with a pained grunt. Using the momentum, I shoved him into the wall, pinning him there with my forearm against his throat. "Call them off," I growled, my voice low and dangerous. "No." He struggled, his face turning red, but I didn't let up. Finally, he nodded, gasping for air. Fine. It's done." I released him, and he slumped to the floor, coughing. The other two men were already retreating, dragging their unconscious companion out the door. Scarface shot me a venomous glare as he followed, but he didn't say another word. The house was eerily quiet once they were gone. I stood there, breathing hard, my fists still clenched. My body ached, the adrenaline fading and leaving behind a dull, throbbing pain. Amanda sat on the couch, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Michael," she whispered. "I didn't know they'd. I didn't think you could." "Save it," I said, cutting her off. "You don't get to play the victim. Not after everything you've done." She flinched, but I didn't care. I was done with her lies, her betrayal, her inability to stand by me when it mattered most. "You need to leave," I said, my voice firm. "Pack your things and go. I don't care where." Her sobs echoed as she disappeared upstairs. I sat down heavily, staring at the broken lamp, the overturned furniture, the blood smeared on my knuckles. This was my life now, a shattered reflection of what it once was. And as much as it hurt, I knew there was no going back. Not after this. The house was a wreck, shards of the broken lamp scattered on the floor, furniture upturned, and faint traces of blood on the carpet where my fists had connected with flesh. My mind buzzed with the aftermath, my thoughts racing to keep pace with my adrenaline-fueled heart. Amanda had disappeared upstairs, her sobs echoing faintly from behind the bedroom door, but I couldn't bring myself to follow. Whatever was left between us had been shattered beyond repair. I sat in silence, trying to make sense of everything. Then the thought hit me, this wasn't over. Scarface and his goons might be gone for now, but men like that didn't just walk away. They'd regroup, retaliate, and the realization sent a cold shiver down my spine. It was time to end this. For good. I made the call without hesitation, dialing 911 with steady fingers. The operator picked up, her calm voice starkly contrasting the chaos that had become my life. "This is Michael Carter," I began, my voice flat but firm. "I'm reporting a group of individuals involved in extortion, assault, and illegal activities. They're armed, dangerous, and they've been operating out of my home." The operator asked for details, names, locations, a description of the events. I gave her everything I could, leaving nothing out, including Amanda's involvement. The words felt heavy as I spoke them aloud, but there was no turning back now. Within minutes, I heard the distant wail of sirens growing louder. I stepped outside, raising my hands as a swarm of squad cars pulled up, their lights bathing the street in red and blue. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, their voices cutting through the night. "Mr. Carter?" one of them asked, approaching cautiously. I nodded. "Inside," I said, gesturing toward the house. "Amanda's upstairs. She's part of this. And there's evidence, documents, photos, they'll explain everything." The officer nodded, motioning to his team. They moved in quickly, their footsteps heavy on the hardwood as they ascended the stairs. A moment later, I heard Amanda's voice, frantic and pleading, as they brought her down in handcuffs. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. The police weren't just dealing with a simple domestic dispute, they'd uncovered something far darker. The documents I'd handed over, combined with Amanda's laptop and phone records, painted a damning picture. It wasn't just me. Scarface and his crew had been targeting men for years, setting them up in elaborate traps to extort money, power, and silence. Their operations were tied to an illegal website, a dark web forum where they shared videos of their exploits, humiliating their victims for profit and amusement. Amanda had been a willing participant, luring men into their schemes with the same manipulative tactics she'd used on me. I sat in the precinct as the officers laid it all out, each revelation hitting me like a sledgehammer. The dinner with Emily, the photo Amanda had used as her excuse, was just the latest in a string of fabricated betrayals meant to justify their twisted form of justice. "You're lucky," one detective said, his expression grim. "Most of their victims don't fight back. They either pay up or suffer in silence. You might have saved more than just yourself by calling this in." I nodded, though his words offered little comfort. The idea that Amanda, the woman I'd shared my life with, had been complicit in something so vile made my skin crawl. Every memory of our time together felt tainted, a grotesque parody of the love I'd thought we'd shared. The next few weeks were a blur of police interviews, court hearings, and media frenzy. The story had gained traction quickly, the scandalous details feeding the public's appetite for drama. Amanda and Scarface, real name Victor Roman, became the faces of the operation, their mugshots plastered across every news outlet. I watched the coverage with a mix of anger and disbelief. Amanda's tearful apologies during the trial felt hollow, her attempts to shift the blame falling flat against the mountain of evidence. She claimed she'd been coerced, threatened by Victor and his crew, but the prosecutors tore through her defense like tissue paper. It didn't matter how much she cried or how often she begged for leniency. The jury saw her for what she was, a willing participant in a cruel, calculated scheme. In the end, she was sentenced to 15 years, a lighter punishment than Victor and the others, but heavy enough to leave no doubt about her guilt. Despite the legal victories, the scars remained. Physically, I'd healed, the bruises faded, the cuts closed, but emotionally, I was far from whole. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound. Amanda's actions had torn through every shred of trust I'd ever had in her, leaving behind a hollow space I didn't know how to fill. But there was a silver lining. The other victims, those who'd suffered silently for years, came forward after the case broke. Men from across the country shared their stories, adding weight to the charges and ensuring the entire operation was dismantled. Knowing that I'd helped stop Victor and his crew offered a small sense of closure, though it did little to ease the pain of my own experience. Months later, I stood in what was once our shared home, now stripped of Amanda's presence. The police had returned my belongings after the investigation, but the house felt empty in a way that went beyond the lack of furniture or decorations. It was the absence of the life we'd built, or the illusion of it, that left the deepest void. As I packed the last of my things, I found the bracelet I'd bought for her in Chicago. It sat in its velvet box, untouched, its tiny diamond-like stars still glinting in the light. I stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into my pocket. Not as a keepsake, but as a reminder. A reminder of the lies, the pain, and the strength it had taken to reclaim my life. And as I locked the door behind me, stepping out into the crisp evening air, I felt something I hadn't in months: freedom. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I was ready to face it. Alone, but unbroken. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the verdict, her voice steady and measured. I sat in the gallery, my hands gripping the polished wooden bench in front of me. The air felt heavy, thick with anticipation. Beside me, reporters scribbled furiously, their pens racing to capture the moment that had taken months of grueling investigation and legal maneuvering to reach. Amanda sat at the defendant's table, her once pristine composure now a shadow of its former self. Her hair, usually immaculate, hung limp around her face, and the dark circles under her eyes betrayed the toll the trial had taken. To her left sat Victor Roman, Scarface, and the other accomplices, their expressions ranging from defiant to resigned. For the charges of conspiracy to commit extortion, fraud, and assault, the judge declared, her voice cutting through the tension, this court sentences Amanda Carter to 20 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Amanda didn't flinch. She kept her gaze forward, her face a mask of stoic defeat. But as the sentence registered, I saw her hands tighten into fists, her knuckles whitening. The judge turned to Victor and the others. For your roles as the primary architects of this criminal operation, the court sentences each of you to 25 years in federal prison. A murmur rippled through the gallery, but the judge silenced it with a sharp rap of her gavel. She continued, detailing the restitution each defendant was required to pay to their victims. When my name was mentioned, I felt a wave of conflicting emotions, relief, anger, and a hollow kind of vindication. The restitution award was significant. Between Amanda and her accomplices, I was granted damages that exceeded anything I'd ever imagined receiving. The sum was meant to cover not only the financial loss and emotional distress they'd inflicted, but also to help rebuild what they'd destroyed. It was, in theory, a clean slate. But money couldn't erase the memories. It couldn't undo the humiliation of being tied up in my own home, the sting of Amanda's betrayal, or the shame I felt for not seeing the truth sooner. Every dollar felt like a bandage on a wound too deep to heal completely. As I left the courtroom that day, the weight of the verdict settled over me. Justice had been served, at least on paper, but the scars ran deeper than I cared to admit. In the weeks that followed, I tried to adjust to the new normal. The house, with its empty rooms and hollow echoes, became unbearable. I sold it, using part of the restitution money to purchase a modest apartment downtown. It was smaller, simpler, and free from the ghosts of my past. Despite the fresh start, I found myself struggling to move forward. Nightmares plagued my sleep, replaying the worst moments of those nights in vivid detail. Amanda's voice haunted me, her accusations and pleas blending into a cacophony of doubt and pain. Therapy became a necessity, though it often felt like trying to drain an ocean with a teacup. One afternoon, as I sorted through the boxes I'd taken from the old house, I found the bracelet I'd bought for Amanda in Chicago. Its diamonds still sparkled, mocking me with the memory of the man I'd been before everything fell apart. I stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into my pocket. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, though I didn't know why. Maybe it was a reminder, not of Amanda, but of who I'd been before her betrayal. A symbol of the hope I once had. I attended every parole hearing for Amanda and her accomplices, though I doubted they'd ever be granted freedom. Each time, I sat in the back, silent and steadfast, watching as they faced the consequences of their choices. Amanda never looked at me directly, though I could feel her gaze dart toward me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Her apologies during the hearings sounded rehearsed, hollow. She spoke of remorse, of wanting to make amends, but her words fell flat. I didn't need her contrition. I needed closure, and I wasn't sure it was something she, or anyone, could give me. Time passed, and the wounds began to scab over. The anger softened into a dull ache, a scar I carried but no longer allowed to define me. I threw myself into work, finding solace in the structure and predictability of my career. The restitution money sat untouched in an account, a safety net I rarely thought about. It wasn't wealth I sought, it was peace. I couldn't erase what had happened, but I could learn to live with it. Amanda had taken so much from me, but she hadn't taken everything. I still had my freedom, my integrity, and the determination to rebuild. And as I stood on the balcony of my apartment one evening, watching the city lights blink like distant stars, I felt something I hadn't in a long time.
Bye-bye.